while back when I was 14 or so, a group of friends and I went out downtown to do a bit of a cosplay photo shoot. We were all dressed pretty crazy, so it wasn't a huge surprise that it drew a bit of attention. Not a big deal, really. We were cool with answering questions about what we were doing and all. We went to a market at the center of downtown for lunch, and once we finished, half of us went to the washroom, and the others waited outside the market and began discussing the best places to take photos. A man approaches us, wanting to know if there was an event going on and why we were dressed the way we were. A second, older man also approached us, standing next to the first guy, and just listens to our conversation. As our conversation dies down, the older man begins to act kind of weird, fidgeting and twitching awkwardly and looking around quickly. Then he smiles at me very creepily and asks if he could kiss me. My immediate reaction as a 14-year-old boy with major anxiety is to quietly say, "No thank you," and hope that was the end of it. It wasn't. The older man takes a step towards me and asks again, adding a please. My friends asked the other younger man if he knew this guy and if they could please leave us alone. The guy apologizes and says he doesn't know this dude, but tries to tell him he should leave us alone. The older man is having none of it, ignoring everyone and taking another step towards me, now demanding that I let him kiss me. I said no again, taking a step back, and suddenly the guy nearly lunges at me. I bolt back to the market, trying to hide in the large crowd, making my way upstairs and collapsing in a corner to cry because that whole experience was absolutely horrifying to me. My friends eventually found me, calmed me down, and we decided that the market wasn't a safe place to be for the moment, so we left, walking to a mall about 7 to 8 blocks away. We walk around for a bit, and finally enjoying myself and calm down, until I turn around to see the same old creep from earlier walking about 10 feet behind us. As soon as he notices I saw him, he gives me the same creepy smile and begins to walk faster. We all ran off, finally losing him, and decided it would just be best to go home and do this photo shoot another day somewhere safer. So, to the guy who tried to kiss me and stalk me for a solid 4 hours around downtown, I'm glad I haven't seen you since, and I hope to never meet you again. This happened a long time ago, about 10 years or so, but I never forgot about it, and it still gives me the chills. By the way, I'm not a native English speaker, so I apologize for any mistakes. I, 33 female, was in my early 20s. At the time, I had a female dog named Nina, a boxer. She passed away when she was 8 from lung cancer. I miss her a lot. Nina was very energetic, so I took her for long walks around the neighborhood, usually at the end of the day, around 4 to 6 p.m., when it wasn't too hot, but not too dark either. One thing you must know about Nina is that she loved people. She did not get along with other dogs, but every time she saw someone walking by us, she would shake her tail and want to get closer to ask for pets. One day, we went on our walk as usual. Everything was fine for most of it. I saw a few other dog tutors walking their dogs, and an old couple sitting in front of their house chatting. And then, when we were alone, Nina suddenly started growling. One thing I didn't mention, I'm a graduate in biology and specialized in animal behavior. At the time this story happened, I was finishing college. So yeah, I used to pay a lot of attention to my dog's behaviors and had quite a lot of knowledge on dog behavior because it was my favorite subject in the area. Dogs can see movement much better than us, so things like an eyebrow raise or a little tension on the shoulders, they can easily pick up. So of course, a dog growling doesn't sound that weird. Nina did growl to other dogs and cats when she saw them, but this was different. It was very low, and all the fur on her back was up. Her entire behavior was of alarm. And then I noticed she was looking back while growling. So I looked behind me. In the distance, like a block away, I saw a man. This made me even more alert, because Nina never growled to anyone on the street before. She never stopped walking by my side or tried to pull me away, but she kept this low growl and kept looking at this man. I started to freak out and turn the next block. She stopped for a second, but when we reached the next corner, she started growling again, and he was there again. He didn't try to talk or call me, and his expression was serious and kind of emotionless. I kept walking in random patterns, and he was always there. That man was definitely following me. At some point, our distance started to shrink, and Nina's growling was getting stronger. When I turned the next corner, I just started running while he couldn't see me. I ran down about 4 blocks in the direction of an area I knew had more traffic and people around. I stopped to catch my breath and looked behind me. He was far away, right in the corner where he started running, just there, standing and looking at me. Nina was looking at him, still with her alarmed posture. After a minute, he turned around and went away in the same direction, and at that moment, Nina finally relaxed. I kept paying attention to Nina's behavior the entire way back to my house, but she was just her normal happy self. I told this story to my parents and a few neighbors, and no one seemed to know of any man that looked like him. I never saw that man again, and Nina never behaved like that again either, so I'll never know who he was or why he was following me. But I definitely do not regret trusting Nina's instincts. So people, please pay attention to your pet's behaviors as much as you can. It's not about a supernatural sixth sense. They can actually feel, see, and hear things better than us, and there's no behavior that happens for no reason. There is always a reason. Stay safe, everyone. Several years ago, I was in a bit of a financial pickle. I was 21 with shitty job history, a shitty job, and shitty credit. You know, like most 21-year-olds. My living situation went sideways, and I had temporarily moved back home with my folks. As anyone who has ever had to move back home as an adult will tell you, this was a terrible, horrible situation, and I was in a rush to get back out on my own. Which is why, when my best friend, similar position in life at the time, told me that an apartment had opened up at her shady-ass complex, I actually jumped at it. If you're from around here, then you'll know that every apartment complex in town is kind of shadester. But for those of you not from here, this place is a shady non-town, outside of another non-town, with more liquor stores than any other establishment, and several apartment complexes with no credit checks and same-day move-ins. A couple months went by, and while the cops did occasionally show up in our parking lot, and you had to watch your step for more than one broken bottle, it wasn't the worst place to live. I worked the night shift at a large retailer, shuffling around freight in the back, hating every minute of every shift. One night, while I trudged up and down a ladder like a zombie at work, my cell phone fell out of my back pocket at the top of the ladder. I grabbed at it, obviously missing, and died a little as I saw it smack to the ground and go black. No amount of restarting or shaking could fix it. The LCD was completely shot. Fucking fuck, I thought to myself, and decided that this was a good enough reason to go home mid-shift. Remember that thing I said about shitty job history? Yeah, you can clearly see why. Driving home at 3 a.m. on some random weekday, Night shifters know how weird it is keeping track of actual days of the week. I turned onto the dark back road that led to my apartment building. I saw something faintly up ahead in the road and immediately think it's someone's dog. I pulled up slower, praying that I wasn't coming up on someone's dead pet, and saw that there was actually a teenage boy laying on the side of the road, waving. There was a bike laying in the dirt next to him. Holy shit. The kid saw me and jumped up, weaving towards the driver's side of my car. Now, I may have made a lot of poor decisions at this point in my life, but thankfully, I hadn't gone completely brain dead. I suddenly thought of all the warnings to young women about how serial killers and rapists would lure girls in by playing to their kind hearts. I locked the car doors, but cracked the driver's side window. Are you okay? What happened? Let me get some help.
I got hit by a car. They fucking left me. I need help.
The kid looked dazed and was scuffed up, but something about him also set my nerves on edge. I'm going to call for help, okay? I grabbed my cell phone and then remembered the damn thing was basically useless due to its ladder plunge. My cell phone is broken, but I live nearby, okay? I'll get help. I hoped he didn't think I was lying, but then I didn't care. The kid slammed his hand against my car.
Just let me in. I need help now.
I felt torn. I wasn't going to let this kid into my car, but at the same time, I couldn't blame him. If I was scared and hurt, I would probably be frantic too. The kid slammed his hand against the car again, and I started driving. I hadn't been exaggerating. It was a 30-second drive to my apartment. I didn't have a landline, and I didn't want to somehow lead this kid into my empty apartment with no way of calling for help. I saw my best friend's boyfriend's car parked in her spot, and immediately was thankful for the stroke of luck. I ran up the steps to her apartment and began banging on the door. Roy answered the door, probably expecting a crazy person, and was immediately even more alarmed to see me. What's going on? Why aren't you at work? I breathlessly explained that some kid had been hit by a car off the back road, but my cell phone wasn't working, and that I needed him to come back with me. Melanie, my best friend, emerged from her room, sleepy and equally confused. Roy immediately took charge, told us both to get in the car, and drove us back to the boy. The kid was still there, waving us down. Roy, a large man, Mel, and myself all got out of the car.
Help! I need help.
I'm here to help. My friend saw you and came and got me, okay? Calm down.
I got jumped by this gang, man. They beat me up and stole my backpack and rode off.
The kid said frantically. I immediately became alarmed. That's not what he told me at all. I looked at Mel, my face clouding over. I thought you got hit by a car. Why did the gang jump you?
What? Yeah, they beat me up, and then someone hit me with a car.
Plausible. I was still confused, though. Roy also seemed wary of this change in the story. Listen, man, let me call an ambulance, okay? Can you tell me your name? The kid lost his shit. He screwed his face up and clenched his fists, hitting the sides of his head.
No, no, no. Just let me in the car, man. Just take me to your house.
Roy was done. That's not happening, kid. I'll call an ambulance and the police, and I can wait with you until they get here, but we can't bring you back with us. The kid slapped the side of his head some more, and then the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, grabbed fistfuls of his shaggy hair and began pulling it out of his scalp. That sound is still the most disgusting and alarming thing I've ever heard. Roy gave Mel and I get the fuck out face, and we jumped back in the car. I'm calling the police, okay? I'll tell them you've been hurt and you need an ambulance. Roy began dialing, and the kid began stomping around and screaming.
Take me to your house. Just let me get in the car. Why won't you take me home? Fuck you. Fuck you.
the kid stood in the street, blood trickling from where he'd torn up his scalp. Roy got back in the driver's seat and spoke with the cops as the kid raged outside. He then came to the window, staring so intently at us that I felt like my skin had shriveled up and fallen off. He began kicking the tires, and Roy, clearly fucking over it, drove off, the kid grabbing frantically at the back of the car. Roy drove past our turn around Peters Creek twice to avoid leading the kid to our apartment complex, and then back down our road. The kid was gone. The bike, the kid, just gone. No idea where he took off to. Clumps of his hair were still on the road. We never saw the kid again. We searched the papers and internet to see if he had been picked up or if any other strange things had taken place that night, but nothing else ever showed up. What confuses me still about it all is why he would demand to come back with all three of us. One person could obviously be easily overtaken, but what the hell were his plans for all three of us? When I was in high school, about 15 years ago, a group of friends and I were hanging out at our friend Dale's house. For some backstory, we lived way out in the country, also technically part of Appalachia, in the kind of middle of nowhere where the nearest neighbors are a few miles up the road. Dale happened to have a cave near his property that we like to explore and be dumb teenagers in. To get to the cave, you had to walk roughly a mile through dense woods and cross a big field. We had yet to find the end of the cave system, despite exploring for hours at a time, multiple times. One day, we had spent the better part of the afternoon exploring the caves, and it had gotten dark by the time we emerged. We already had flashlights, so that was no big deal. My memory is a little fuzzy on the exact details, but for some reason, our friend Sam decided to go back to the house a little earlier. I want to say we had ordered pizza or something, and he went to meet the driver. The rest of us started making our way back through the woods to Dale's house when he started hearing voices in the woods. We were asking each other if we heard that and where it came from, but we each had a different direction of where we thought it was coming from. It was a childlike voice, and it sounded like talking or whispering, but you couldn't make out what was being said. At this point, we thought one of our friends was messing with us and started to talk back to it. It sounded like a child giggling, and then our flashlights started to flicker and die. We had one dim light left to get the rest of the way back. We were all thoroughly freaked out, prank or not, and hightailed it back to the house, adrenaline pumping. We all got in the house, shut the door, and I felt a sense of safety for a split second before the crucifix on the wall literally came off the wall and broke on the floor. It literally seems like something out of a bad horror movie, but we all watched it legitimately come off the wall and crash on the ground for no apparent reason. Before that moment, I hadn't been convinced that it wasn't our other friend Sam that was messing with us, even though he really wasn't the type. We all started word vomiting at Sam, trying to explain what had just happened and question if he had something to do with it, but he genuinely seemed freaked out and confused. He actually said that on his way back to the house earlier, he kept hearing weird things and seeing lights in the woods, and he thought it was us trying to play a prank on him. I don't know what it was. Maybe our friend is a great actor, but I honestly don't think it was a prank. The feeling I got in the woods, like every hair was standing on end, goosebumps on my goosebumps, and every fiber of my being screaming to run. I have never felt like that again, and never want to. This is my first post, and apologies if this is long. I'm adding in the pertinent detail but there may be a lot. Whilst I've always been skeptical and evidence-based, hence adding all I have to this, I've never been able to shake this experience. My mother and her sisters have all had what may be termed as paranormal experiences, but without my personal experience, until this point, I only thought of them as intriguing stories. As I take after my mother, though, I'm male. It's possible that they have a perception, which I share. This may be relevant later. In the mid-1990s, aged about 21, I moved into the top floor of a 3-story building in Birmingham, Edgbaston, UK, which had been converted into flats. Mine had its own small landing and separate bedroom, and a lounge and kitchen. I also had 2 kittens, who play their part in this. Having previously shared a house with friends, and being young, this was my first time by myself, which may explain the feeling, but it felt a very tranquil place, with the exception of my current house, the most peaceful place I've lived. Again, this may be relevant later. Nothing of real relevance happened for the majority of the time I lived there, but I would often be listening to music for hours with my eyes closed, absorbing every note, frequently Nick Drake, whom I've had recently discovered, and feel as though someone was sat listening with me. I didn't pay too much attention to this, with my very scientific background, but the sensation was as if someone was sat next to you, and if you closed your eyes, you would know and sense they were there. Hard to explain, but it somehow felt nice, and I got used to it, putting it down to my own imagination, though. Fairly often, the 2 kittens would be playing in the lounge, and both suddenly stop and stare at the same spot on the wall, then follow something around the room together. Again, thought nothing of it for a while, but then realized there was never an insect or reflection which they would be looking at. Eventually, with the frequency of this, combined with the feeling of a presence, whenever I saw them do this, I would tell them to stop watching the ghost. Although, of course, I was saying this very much tongue-in-cheek. Another curiosity with them was that they would refuse to enter the bedroom or quickly leave if carried in there. Something else I didn't pay much attention to until later. I'd lived there for about 1.5 years and decided I would save some money and share a house with someone I knew. When I told the landlord, he commented that, of all of his properties, this one was very much an outlier, and that no one, apart from me, had ever stayed there for more than a few weeks or a couple of months, and I had been there 18 to 24 months. A few weeks before moving out, the first notable thing happened. At the foot of my bed is an outside wall, with a small window to the left. As I lay down in the bed one evening, the only light was the moonlight and a distant street light. I closed my eyes and realized, although dark, I could still see the room around me. I thought my eyes must be open, so I scrunched them shut to be sure. Sounds odd, I know, but I could still see and was definitely not asleep. I was both marveling at and trying to understand whatever craziness this was, when I had what I could only describe as an out-of-body experience. I began floating up to the ceiling, stopped at a few feet away, then floated towards the foot of the bed and outside the wall. Admittedly, I was now in a panic, as I didn't know what was happening, but the overriding fear was floating through the wall and not returning. I do feel conflicting thoughts typing this, so I tried to shake myself back down somehow. I then had that falling sensation you get in dreams, and then jolt when you wake up. So, despite feeling I was awake the whole time, I put it down to having fallen asleep immediately and going straight into a dream. A week later, at my final week at the flat, I went to bed one night, closed my eyes, and again could see the room around me. As I looked around again with my eyes closed, I was first excited at being able to repeat this, but then remembered the out-of-body experience. That worried me, so I opened my eyes so that it wouldn't happen again, but also to know that I was awake. As I look across to the diagonally opposite corner of the room where the window was, I looked slightly left at the standalone wardrobe and saw the image of a young woman standing there, about 12 feet away, looking at me. Her image was formed with misty white and dark shadow, and I saw she had long, straight, shiny hair as a standout feature. No, this is way before the original Ring films. I can imagine what some may think. Of course, it scared the crap out of me. I tried to put it down to tired eyes and the moonlight making the shape, but then she slowly made her way to the bed and, as best as I could make out, leaned over as if to kiss me goodnight. With all my bravery and rational thinking, I pulled the covers over my head, scared out of my mind, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did, and I don't know how long I lay there waiting, but eventually I went to sleep. I thought that was it, and the next day put it down to an overactive imagination, despite what I've shared above. I later moved out without telling anyone any of this, for fear of being labeled a crazy person. A few weeks later, I'm with my dad in his car one evening, and we drive past the house. We both look at it and notice the lounge light is on in the top floor window. He says it looks like someone has moved in already, to which I replied, thinking he'd laugh at me just being silly. Yeah, either that or it's the ghost. To my surprise, he looks at me with a stern face. He's usually very much a life and soul type person, and asks me if I'm being serious. That worries me. He pulls the car over and says that it's really important, and he's deadly serious, to let him know if there's anything I should tell him. So I start relaying to him what I've said above, and he's obviously concerned. He asks me to describe her, and once I have, he replies, "Yep, that's her." I think I was more shocked at that moment than the night I saw her. He then tells me, "When I said where you'd move to, your nan wanted you to move out right away, but we didn't say anything to you as we didn't want to worry you. Your nan's next door neighbor had a daughter, and she was murdered in the flat by someone she worked with one New Year's Eve. My nan's neighbors were roughly the same age, so this would have been late 60s or early 70s. You just described her exactly, and the police said when they found her, she had not long had a bath and had been strangled with her dressing gown belt. One thing they remarked upon was how long and shiny her hair was. Still gives me chills, but this isn't the end of it." At this point, I still hadn't told anyone, apart from close family, about my experience, trying to avoid the loony label. I was in my early 40s and working at a company as a software tester. As I say, my mindset is technical and facts-oriented. A guy starts on my team 10 years my senior, but we have the same interests and personality, and we get on great, still friends. A horror movie has just come out, so we were talking about it, which leads to the talk of similar movies. And then he tells me about a scary experience he once had himself, that he was lying in bed one night and suddenly had the sensation of being strangled. He said it was so vivid he swore it was real, but opened his eyes and no one else was there. He lived by himself in a flat. I asked him where this was. Same area. I asked him the road. Same road. House number. Flat. Same one. He lived there about 10 years previous to my stay there. That was the first time I then told someone else about my experience. Did she show herself to me because of the links between our families? Is this why the flat was so peaceful for me and not previous tenants? Is that why they moved? Could I see her because of some ability, however small, which runs in my family? Is this what the kittens could sense? I've had a few other separate experiences, and so has my family, but they're for another post. Despite that experience, I'm still skeptical. So many questions I can't wrap my head around. Like, how would a spirit have a conscious thought or action? How do clothes become part of an apparition? Why do we have little, if any, hard evidence? At the same time, I have no other explanation for what happened, other than that was a lot of weird coincidences. If you made it this far, thank you. And I quite understand that to many of you, this is just someone else's story. But at the same time, there is still an unthinkable amount of secrets to the universe humanity has yet to unlock. So I was maybe 3 years old, back in the 80s, living in an old farmhouse with my mom, father, and 2 brothers. The house was an old 2-story with a creepy basement. My room at this time was upstairs, second door on the right. My room is set up so when you come to the door, you see a dresser straight on, with a closet door being blocked to its right, my bed foot to wall to the dresser left, and an armoire to the bed's right. Nothing else in the room. My middle brother had a room to the left, right next to mine. It was late, and I had fallen asleep on the couch downstairs in the living room, in just my t-shirt and underwear. My mom woke me up and told me to go up to bed. I had no problem with this. I was tired. So I walk upstairs, past the first room on my right, and then get to my bedroom. My bedroom door was open. I go to walk over to the threshold of the door, and I get stopped. No, I didn't stop. I got stopped. I could not walk into my room. It was like there was a wall in front of me, and it would not let me by. I started crying. I think I started crying for my mom, because she ended up coming upstairs. I told her the room wouldn't let me in. She gave me a look, and she laughed a little. My mom asked me what I meant. I told her I could not get into my room. It wouldn't let me. Meanwhile, I'm still bawling my head off. I'm tired and confused. I asked her if I can sleep in my brother's room. My brother ends up waking up because of my crying, so I asked him if I could sleep in his room. He looks at my mom. He looks at me, walks back into his room, and shuts the door. My mom tries to make me feel better and asks me if she wants me to check for monsters. I nod my head yes, and to my surprise, she just walks into my bedroom. I couldn't do that. How could she? Anyway, she opens the armoire and looks inside, and then checks under my bed. Now, my bedroom was spotless, except for one white sock with 2 stripes lying on the floor in front of my dresser. While my mom was looking under the bed, I was looking at that sock from the threshold of my doorway, and out from underneath my dresser came a wooden hand, and it grabbed the sock. I freaking lost it. I screamed. I peed myself. All I could do was point and say it grabbed it. My brother came back out of his room. I was crying hysterically. He was trying to tell me to shut up. My mom comes over to me, and she kneels down in front of me, trying to calm me. She asks what I saw. I told her I saw a hand that looked like wood, with the same color as the dresser, medium brown, come out from underneath the dresser and grab the sock and pull it back under with it. My mom straight up laughed at me then, but she turned around on her knees and was going to look under the dresser. Fear washed over me as I thought my mom was going to get grabbed. The wall that blocked me was gone. I pounced on her, trying to drag her away from the dresser. Not that a child can drag an adult. She then realized how terrified I was, so to prove to me that there was nothing under my dresser, she pulled it away from the wall. Now there was no hand. However, there was a white sock with 2 red stripes, sitting as if it got pulled right up to the wall. Needless to say, I had never slept in that room again. No one slept in that room again. It became a storage room. My mom no longer lives in that house. The dresser is still around. It's at my mom's new house, and in the bottom drawer is a crucifix that has candles and holy water inside of it, and a Bible that lays next to the crucifix, just in case. When I was probably 13, my family and I were on our way home from a Wednesday night church service. My mom was in the driver's seat, and I was behind her in the back. My 5-year-old brother was in the middle, and my 10-year-old sister on his other side. We were just down the road from the church, but it was a country road, and late, so there was no light and no one else on the road. We were just coming up to our turn, when all of a sudden a car comes swerving from our turning spot. This little car was taking the turn so fast that they came into our lane and almost hit us. We swerved as they tried to get in their own lane before we collided. Unfortunately for them, they overcorrected, and the car flipped and landed on the driver's side door in the ditch. My mom, of course, hits the brakes and immediately jumps out of the car to go help whoever was in there. She got about 3 steps away from our car and stopped dead in her tracks. My sister and I are sitting there with our mouths hanging wide open, having no clue what to do. All I could think is, this isn't actually happening to us. This kind of stuff only happens in movies. But why isn't my mom going to help the person? It was summer, so we all had our windows halfway down. I heard a person start yelling help from the inside, and my mom starts moving again to help him. But for some reason, she stops again in the center of the road. Another car flies behind us, and the guy doesn't hesitate to jump up and run to the crash to help. The man gets to the car and starts prying the passenger door open so the guy inside can get out. I can see my mom wants to run and help, but it's like she can't move from that spot. The Good Samaritan that pulled up behind us is able to get the door propped open. The guy from inside crawls out the door and gets into a frog-like crouching position on top of the car. At this point, my mom starts taking shovel steps back to the car. When I look back at the guy, he has this crazy look on his face. He looks directly at our car and my mom and launches himself off the top of the car and hits the guy who was helping him. He starts running for our car at the same time my mom turns and runs for our car. He must have knew he couldn't get in there before my mom did, because he changed directions and moved to the car behind us. My mom jumps in and locks our doors, just as the guy jumps in the empty driver's seat of the car behind us. He slams on the gas before he's even closed the door and almost hits us, taking off a second time. Next thing we know, the guy who was just carjacked runs up to my mom's window and starts screaming and knocking on the window. My mom is, of course, shaken and doesn't want to roll down the window, so she settles for cracking it so we can understand what he's saying. He's yelling, asking us to call 911 because his phone was in the car along with his girlfriend. So, of course, my mom starts searching for her phone to call, but because she's so frantic from what just happened, she can't seem to find it. So I take a break from keeping my little brother and sister calm and dial 911 on my phone and hand it to her. While she's explaining what happened to the 911 operator, we hear a woman scream down the road. The man that was at our window takes off running, and a few minutes later comes back with a severely scraped up woman in his arms that turned out to be his girlfriend. My mom unlocks the doors at this point, and he sets her in the passenger seat while we wait for the cops. The girlfriend told us that he had noticed her while he was speeding off and tried to hit her, but she scratched and punched at him while trying to plead with him to stop the car. He kept coming at her, though, and finally rolled down the window and pushed her out, going about 60. The cops finally show up and talk to all of us to get our stories. While talking to one officer, he told my mom that the man had shot and killed a man behind some apartment complex. That's why he was driving so fast and trying to get away. When we finally got home, we were all able to go to bed. But of course, I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, so I went downstairs to talk to my mom. I worked up the courage to ask her why she stopped running to the car when the other guy didn't. She told me that she had such a strong feeling that she should stay in the car with us, that it was almost like she could hear it. When she heard him start yelling for help, she ran to help, but just like last time, she got the overwhelming feeling not to go to the car. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if my mom hadn't listened to that feeling. The man could have easily overpowered her and gotten to the car if she had been any further away. I should also mention the man was caught that night trying to steal a new car. He had already ditched the car that he stole from behind us. So the thing that really helped him get convicted was that when the woman was fighting him off, she grabbed the wrap off his head before falling out. She didn't know she did this until the police got there and found it by where she was pushed. He did go to jail, but I was never informed of how long or anything else. And honestly, I never cared to ask. When I was around 12 years old, I spent the afternoon at a friend's house who I knew from school. He lived in a neighborhood that I wasn't all that familiar with, so when we decided to take our bikes out for a ride, I simply followed him until we came to a large wooded area. It was in a valley that descended away from the roadside, and from what I could see, became rather dense and overgrown quite quickly. Because of all of the foliage, we decided to leave our bikes and go down on foot. We'd been hiking for about 20 minutes when we realized that we could no longer see the spot that we had left our bikes and were surrounded on all sides by thick vegetation. Being boys, we thought this was absolutely fantastic and decided to carry on further into the valley. At some point, we came across what looked like an abandoned campsite. There were some old cans lying around that looked like they had been used to boil water, an old ashy fire pit, and quite a lot of plastic sheeting. We had a look around, but didn't really find anything interesting, so decided to carry on with our hike. Just as we were leaving, somebody called out to us from somewhere on the other side of the camp. A homeless man appeared, no doubt the camp dweller, and demanded to know what we were doing with his things. We explained that we didn't take anything and were just looking around, and he calmed down. We made polite conversation for a few minutes, exchanged names, and gave a vague idea of where we had come from. At this point, we didn't feel like we were in any danger, and the homeless guy was actually quite friendly. We decided to get going, though, and say our goodbyes, but he told us that we had to give him something before we went. We hadn't brought any food or water with, and so didn't have anything to offer him, and he apparently took exception to this. He started yelling at us and demanding our shoes, which neither of us were willing to part with. We started to back away from him, and at the same time, try and figure out which way we had come from, when all of a sudden, he pulled a knife out and started running towards us. I don't remember exactly which way we went, or how far we had to run, as I was terrified and full of adrenaline. I looked back a few times and realized that we were getting away from him, but he was still chasing us, even though there was no cover from the trees at this point. We reached the side of the road where we had left our bikes, and fortunately had enough of a lead on him so that we could hop on and pedal for all we were worth. A couple of builders who were offloading materials up the road saw that we were panicking and stopped us to find out what was going on. We gave them a brief version of events, and they went back to see if he was still around, but apparently he was gone when they got there. My friend told his folks what happened that day, but I never heard anything more about it. As far as I know, he could still be living at his campsite, but I certainly wasn't going to go back and check. When I was about 12, I decided making a newspaper for my entire neighborhood was a really great idea. My friend and I, both avid fiction wannabe authors and generally cringy middle school nerds, decided to get together once a month and write absolutely enthralling articles about the weather or when the pool would be open, and then deliver our front and back one-page newsletter to every single house in our two-street neighborhood, whether they wanted it or not. We kept this up for about 2 years, until the time of this story. So we were on our once-a-month paper route, if you could call walking around our small neighborhood and putting a single sheet of paper in every mailbox a paper route. It was raining this particular time, so we had umbrellas and were carefully walking to each mailbox, trying to keep our newsletter as dry as possible. This also meant that all the cars that came by had their headlights and windshield wipers on, and also made sufficient noise with their tires splashing through the puddles. My point is that we knew when a car was approaching behind us. We were about halfway through on the street we weren't so familiar with, the one we didn't live on, when we noticed this souped-up old white car coming really slowly up the street. Now, the way my neighborhood was set up, the only reason why you would be on the same street as us is if you lived there or you made a wrong turn. So there were even less cars on this street, and the ones that passed usually were people that we knew. We continued walking from mailbox to mailbox while periodically checking to make sure the white car wasn't just parked. It was moving so slowly, and the headlights and windshield wipers were either broken or just not turned on. This car drove slowly past us as we walked, going roughly the same pace as our steps, if not slower. Something was so off about everything. There was no reason for this car to be on this road in the first place. We definitely didn't recognize it or the driver inside, and it was going so incredibly slow. Car trouble? I don't know. We pretended one of the houses was ours and walked up the driveway to avoid the car. As it got close to us, it continued at the same pace, and we watched it until it eventually disappeared around the corner. We laughed about it, thinking it was weird, but nothing happened. It was all well and good until the car showed up at the end of the street behind us again, going just as slowly as it had before. What was this person doing? We were so confused and walked a little farther from the curb to avoid the car as it came by. We didn't laugh about it this time. The car showed up a third time at the end of the street, and at this point, we decided we should cut through some yards to get home. Better safe than sorry, right? We crossed the street, but the car passed again. We shrugged it off and kept going. The fourth time this car came around, it pulled up right next to us, and the driver had his window down. Being 12 and living in a bubble, my friend and I hadn't been quite exposed to the world of drugs and junkies, but we knew something was up with this guy. He had a white towel draped over half of his head, was wearing a white tank top while we were in long sleeves and rain jackets, had his window down, and when he spoke, his speech was slurred. We were polite and said hello, and he asked us what we were doing through his open window. We continued walking as this interaction took place because we knew this dude seemed sketch, but at the same time, we didn't want to assume anything and be rude. When we told him we ran a newspaper, he immediately perked up and enthusiastically asked about placing an ad. He also took his hands off the steering wheel and leaned over so he could get closer to the window. He smelled of cigarettes. My friend and I looked at each other. We knew something was wrong. We told him no, we don't place ads in our newspaper, even though we did. Quite the entrepreneurs at 12. He told us we were pretty girls and probably cold. Our idea to cut through some yards was decided. We hurriedly said something about needing to go home, and he began shouting at us from inside the car as we crossed the street. We bolted to a neighbor's backyard when we heard the car began to move quickly and hid in some bushes until we were sure that the car was gone. We stopped writing the newsletter after that. Meeting a creepy person while you're alone in the rain, in your own neighborhood, was a good deciding factor for calling it quits. So, weird, and probably high dude that tried to talk to 12-year-old me and my friend. Let's please never meet again. It was a hot, humid summer day, and my aunt was having a small get-together at her house. My family went over in the afternoon. After a few hours, there was a lull in action, and my cousin and I wanted to go for a walk and enjoy the air as it was getting a bit cooler. We had no particular route in mind when we set off, but after about a mile, my cousin suggested we continue to our other aunt's apartment, which was the neighborhood over, and check in on her. The idea didn't sit well with me. I was, and still am, a very cautious person, but she was older than me and assured me it would be fine. We wanted to keep walking anyway, so why not? We walked for so long that the sun began setting as we crossed over a bridge that traversed a creek and brought us into the more urban neighborhood in which my aunt lived. We stopped to take a short break, admiring the water while we chatted. I remember seeing the orange and red deepen in the sky and the shadows of the trees along the bank lengthen and gently sway. At this point, I was getting a bit tired, so I was happy when my cousin said we only had a few more blocks to go. We kept on a sidewalk that ran the length of the right side of a very wide road. As we kept going, we noticed on the left side of the road there was a smaller one that branched off at about a 30-degree angle. Given the fading light, we could also make out the figure of a large framed person walking in our direction. He was about 1,000 feet away when he saw us and roared at the top of his lungs.
Hey!
He flailed his arms to get our attention. Then he pointed and hollered.
You!
My cousin and I were taken aback. I remember thinking why he would scream like that, even if he thought he knew us. The manner and tone of his yell was unsettling. It was about 5 seconds before our mix of surprise and concern quickly turned to pure fear as the man took off in an all-out sprint towards us. Now, 1,000 feet seemed decently far away, but he was coming at us like Usain Bolt, and he was closing this distance fast. Fortunately, my cousin snapped into flight mode, and we took off running as fast as we've ever ran in our lives. With all the adrenaline pumping through me, I barely felt my feet hit the ground, each spring forward. Even so, I was just barely keeping up with my cousin, so she grabbed my wrist and held it firmly as we ran. The guy shouted once again as he chased us, and my cousin glanced back. I'll never forget the look of terror on her face. She must have had an extra rush of adrenaline, because she burst forward even faster, my wrist in hand. We were flying. As we closed in on my aunt's place, I could hear the man's footsteps getting a little louder. I could tell from the sound that he wasn't directly behind us, but I prayed we'd manage to keep enough distance to turn right at the next block and get to my aunt's yard unscathed. Thankfully, the sun was almost fully set, and it was even darker than before, so I knew it would be harder to see where we went once we turned off the main road. Within a few seconds, we were rounding the corner and slowing down to open my aunt's gate. She lived in a basement apartment on a corner lot, which had a yard that was fenced all around by 6-foot-tall wooden panels. As my cousin went through the gate and ran into the yard first, I was the one to close it. We'd been going so fast, and I had so much adrenaline, my first impulse was to slam it and run down the steps to the apartment door. But my instinct told me that the noise might alert him to where we were, so I closed the gate as quietly and quickly as possible. I looked for a lock, but there was none. I ran to where my cousin was, on the steps leading down to the door. We stood on the steps with our eyes just above ground level, trying to keep as quiet as possible. A few seconds later, I heard the man's footsteps and saw him run across the street that flanked my aunt's yard. He stopped for a moment to look around, breathing hard and mumbling expletives. I held my breath as I saw his eyes and the top of his head swivel around wildly, searching for any sign of us. In a flash, he suddenly took off down the side street, past the yard, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We knew we had to get indoors now. We had waited to knock on my aunt's door before because we didn't want to make any noise. We knocked on the door, being careful not to bang and draw attention, but there was no answer. No one was home. My cousin began looking for a spare key that she may have hidden, while I tried to get the small window by the door open. No luck. At this point, we were trying not to panic, but it started to dawn on us the danger we were in, and the fact that we didn't have any good options for safely getting inside or back home. It was dark now. We were both tired and knew we couldn't outrun him again if he doubled back and saw us. We didn't want to be sitting ducks, especially since the gate didn't have a lock, and trying to run back was too risky given how far it was. Fortunately, my prayers were answered some minutes later when the neighbor's backyard light turned on and we heard barking. A couple was letting their small dogs out, and they stood on their deck talking while the dogs ran around. My cousin and I crept over to the fence and could see through a few cracks in between the panels. We managed to get their attention and explained what just happened. They were definitely surprised, but were also very nice and understanding. They must have heard the panic and desperation in our voices because they took us seriously. They offered to drive us home, and we gratefully accepted. As they drove us back to my aunt's house, I remember being so glad they went outside when they did. This happened to me 4 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old and had been offered a job at a classmate's mom's mini market. Here in my country, I'm in South America for context. Those are pretty common and sell everything from frozen food to bathroom necessities. Usually, people will build a tiny separate building next to their house for it and work the store themselves. Every condo and village, these seem to mean something entirely different here, has about one on every main street. Anyway, my classmate's mom offered me to work there, Monday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with some very good cash and free lunch. He lived about a mile away, and my house was directly connected to his by a cycle path, so I would get to use my brand new bike as means of transportation. Basically, the perfect job for a teenager. I did not enjoy working there. Don't get me wrong, I actually like working, and I like money, but this store had so much going on in it. So I had to make ice cream cones, bag chicken breasts, laminate ham and cheese. Again, I think those things already come laminated in most countries. Work the coffee machine, and keep everything immaculate and in order, while checking that all the stuff this lady had in her store wasn't expired. Keep in mind, I'm talking January 2014, and I found a bag of sausages expired on January 2013 being sold during my first week there. Overall, it wasn't really abusive. She just didn't know how to manage her store or her money. That's a completely different story, though. But by the way, ex-boss, let's not ever meet again. Because God, your store was unsanitary AF. Anyhow, one of my main jobs there was keeping an eye on fruit and veggies, meaning checking for the rotten ones and throwing them away, and refilling the goddamn tomatoes if the shelf was emptying. There was only one huge problem for me as a 5'4", 120-pound girl, the 45-pound potato sack. For context, right in front of the store, there was a huge green area, and we have public workers, gardeners, who take care of them. They have one specific person in charge of specific areas, so the same man would always be there doing his job. Let's call him Pete. Back when my only boss and her family worked their store, they would ask Pete to help take the potatoes from the car and drop them at the back of the store. He would always help, and the only thing he asked for as payment was a cup of coffee and a sandwich. This man was in his late 50s, didn't go through education, he couldn't read, and usually asked me to read the newspaper to him. And even though he didn't seem to have any kind of mental handicap, he wouldn't understand that there were limits to how you approach people and what is and isn't appropriate. More on that later. Anyway, whenever we had to take the potatoes out of the car, my boss would phone him and he would come in quickly, as he had a red bike with an engine attached to it. Everyone was very comfortable with him. He was just an old man who helped with the heavier duties and asked for very little in return. As I started learning the job, my boss wouldn't be around to help me when I had doubts, meaning I was completely alone in the store. I would struggle by myself on moving the potatoes from the back of the store, and often would lose a piece of a fingernail or something. Because of this, whenever she left, she would ask the gardener to keep an eye on me and help me with it. The problem began pretty quickly. I've interacted many times with people with conditions, and I'm not trying to be rude, but when someone has kind of a mental health issue or syndrome, even if they can normally function and even have jobs, you can kind of tell, and I assure you, this man was completely healthy and normal. Looking back, I think he was using his lack of education as a way to shield his behavior, and so people pitied him and felt guilty for not liking him, and he would try to take advantage of the girls who worked there. There had been some before me. I never met them. He would fixate on certain topics, always repeat the same conversations, and become way too close to me and my coworker, another classmate. He would stand too close and talk some very personal problems with me. Keep in mind, he was 30 plus years older. I was underage. He became another one of the many unpleasant duties I had to deal with on a daily basis. As weeks progressed, he gave me his phone number so that I could call him whenever I needed assistance. I never called him because, of course, I didn't want to be around him, and because I'm the type of person who thinks they don't need help. When he realized I wasn't calling him, he tried to push me into giving him my number. I never did, so he would stay right in front of the store and come in every 20 minutes. He gave me a bicycle seat, and even though I told him I didn't want it, he could keep it, thanks a lot. He removed my original brown seat and put on the one he got me. He would tell me he was single and owned a house. He would call me pretty and try to play with my hair, etc. I was severely uncomfortable around him, but no one seemed to be bothered by any of those things. It made me feel very awkward and guilty for feeling these things, which only contributed to the already disappointing feeling of working in this unsanitary place. I decided to just do my best to ignore him. When he realized I was distant, he started accusing me of being mean with my boss, but nothing else. It was only a summer job, so I thought I would just have to stand it for a month, then it would be over. But oh no. One good day, 2 weeks before I had to leave, he tells me he's in love with me. Dead serious, too. I was 17 and had no experience with love and such. I'd never had anyone tell me something like that. Usually, I'm a very short-tempered person and snap easily and could have told him to stop fucking with me. But this just left me speechless. He had already been flirting with me for 2 months, even though I was underage. He had given me presents. I had seen him lift 2 potato sacks on one shoulder. He could certainly do as he pleased with me. I started to sweat. I was feeling violated, even when he wasn't trying to approach me. But he just stared so deeply into my eyes that it was clear he was trying to make me feel inferior. I didn't know what to do, and he wasn't leaving the store. My boss arrived like 10 minutes after this, so we started chatting with her, but I was left feeling violated for the rest of my shift. 2 weeks after, my contract ended for the summer. I thought I would never see him again. But again, oh no. There are green areas where I live too. One day, as I was walking my dog, I see a bright red bike with an engine attached to it next to some swings in the park. I recognize it. It was his bike. He saw me and ran towards me, crossing the street even though cars were coming. I have 3 dogs. One is a pit bull mix and the other a husky mix. The third one is a Yorkie, before you ask, and none of them liked him. You would think my big-ass dogs would stop him from standing too close to me, but no, and he only took a few steps back when my pit tried to bite his hand. I never had seen them so angry. He told me his boss had realized he was slacking on his job to help at the store, and he didn't like that, so he was moved to another area away from the store. My area. He insisted on asking where my house was, just like he insisted on my phone number back in the day. My house was a 1/4 mile away. I told him I lived in the opposite direction because, of course, I didn't want to tell him where I lived. That day, I told my mom about this creepy old man and all the things he had done to that point. She yelled at me for not snapping at him or something. Like she didn't understand that this man could carry 2 of those potato sacks on one shoulder. I asked her not to tell my dad because he would get mad at me. Yes, they're the kind of parents who get mad at their kids for things that aren't their fault. They once yelled at my brother when he had his phone stolen on the bus by a guy with a knife. Mom did tell, though. The next day, my father mysteriously offered to walk the dogs, and the day after that, Pete wasn't around to be seen. Mom told me later that Dad approached Pete and threatened him. Knowing my dad, he probably told him about his military background and his gun. Pete asked to be moved to any other area right there, with his boss on speaker and my dad listening. My city is pretty small, so I still see him when I go on longer walks, about 4 miles from my house, but he no longer tries to talk to me. Instead, he keeps his head down and starts moving faster in the opposite direction. Goodbye, you old creep. Let's not fucking meet again. For some background info, I'm female and was 17 at the time of this story. I used to work at a pizza place in my hometown. The job sucked in many ways, but the worst part about it was that my manager had no problem leaving girls alone to close. Granted, the town I grew up in was small and boring, and many people left their doors unlocked, but I still thought it was risky. On this particular night, I was closing the shop around 10. The last thing I had to do on the way to my car was take the garbage out, and the dumpster, as well as my car, were located on the side of the building. While I was making my way to the dumpster, I immediately noticed a man making his way towards me from across the shop's parking lot. He was wearing jeans and a black sweatshirt, and he had some sports cap on. Right off the bat, my heart dropped, and I got incredibly nervous. I threw the trash away and began speed walking to my car when this guy says something.
You got a cigarette?
My paranoia told me that the question was sketchy as hell, and I struggled to respond for a moment. I just said no and got in my car, and I shit you not, as soon as I closed my door, he booked it to my car and tried to open it. Obviously, I locked it immediately. I instantly started bawling and turned my car on. The man clubbed my window with his fists a few times, without a word, before booking it again into the nearby streets. I called my mom and then the police once I got home, and they opened a small investigation, but could never find the guy. There were no other cases of something like this happening somewhere else in town, and so I think he probably relocated somewhere else to avoid being caught. I really have no clue what that man wanted to do. Sorry if this was kind of lame or anticlimactic, but it was pretty damn scary to me. So, To the man who tried to get in my car, let's not meet again. Hi, lovely friends. Before the video ends, I just wanted to thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Please like and comment if you enjoyed. It really helps me. I hope that you're doing well. I appreciate you. Please stay safe and sweet dreams.